the question that we got, and this isn't like a Q&A episode, but the question that we got was about mobility a few times. We've been covering a few things which seem to have gotten us some attention specific to covering topics about fitness and health for folks that are a bit over 40, right, or nearing their 40s. I find that to be interesting. It makes sense to some extent because I think we talk about and we work with those people a lot. Like if you're 25 years old and listening to this, that is awesome, and we appreciate the listen, and we try to keep everything as relevant as we can. But when we talk about fitness at 40 or whatever age that you're not, we're hopefully trying to get through to you about thinking about the future differently than the way we were thinking about it maybe when we were your age or doing stuff. So
I wasn't even thinking about it in my 20s.
I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yes.
So, we were trying to be, for all of you people that are trying to be slim thick right now, like mobility is going to become a thing for you at some point. At some point in your life, I'll make this promise to you. I guarantee at some point, one day you're going to wake up and you're going to go, ooh, and you're going to notice that you're not quite as mobile, flexible, on top of strong, slim, thick, whatever, have as much hair as you used to have. You'll have hair in places that you didn't want to think you would ever have it, and all those kind of things.
Or changing colors in places you didn't think it would change colors.
Look at my fucking
face. My wife looked at me the other day and looked at my ear and then pulled out a long black hair. And she reacted. I was like, oh my God,
I'm starting to get that too. Yeah, the ear hair, the nose hair.
What the fuck is that? And I lost all the hair on my head, if you can't see with the hat on, but it's just migrating down. It's just, Anyways, I digress.
Yeah, no comment. I'm not even going to get involved because I battle these issues every single day of my life. But that said, talking about mobility and trying to put together a mobility routine that works for you when you're 40 or over. So I think we've said this before on the show. At some point, you will get into your fitness routine or your program, and you will start to get this consistency going. And invariably, like everybody, you'll run into challenges with time, space, wherever you are in your journey. The first thing that you're going to start to compromise when you're short on time or limited on equipment or whatever else are the little things, right? You're going to try to get the bulk of the work done. And let's be honest, like we preach that all the time. Like if you're going to go to the gym, you're going to get your resistance training done. Like we talk about, and we've just done that actually very recently, like how to organize yourself so that you're getting the most out of the time that you spend there. And it's really tough to kind of talk like that, but then also talk about, but don't skip your mobility, right? Don't skip the flexibility time if that's what you need, more of that. So, but the importance of this is as the things pile on over life, like being fit is important, right? Being strong, being healthy is important. And in order to be as fit, as strong, as healthy as you can, mobility is a component there that is often overlooked until, again, you wake up one day and go, oh shit, like I am not as mobile as I need or want to be at this point in my life for the workout that I'm doing, the activity that I'm trying to perform, whatever it happens to be. So we're going to talk about that today and kind of putting together a routine that can be as effective and efficient as possible for you, and keeping in mind the audience and who that person might be. So I think whenever you're looking at like, okay, what are the top tips, and what's the checklist of things you can go down? You got to kind of start with the compass, right? And what are you coming at this with? And again, like where does mobility come up for you in your life? So I'll stop talking and I'll kind of put this out there. Like from an individual perspective, just now where you are in your lives, like we got 2 in here that are over 40 and we got 2 that are on their way, right? We got 1 that's got a birthday tomorrow, right? Yeah. And how much closer does that get you to 40?
I'm 29 tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I still got a little bit of time.
Really?
All right.
Yeah, I'm 29 tomorrow.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, dude, 40 will be on you in a minute.
Yeah.
It'll be on you in a minute.
This is the first birthday I had someone check my ID the other day, and it was a kid working at a grocery store, and he was like, "Oh, you're old." and I was like, "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" He's like, "It's definitely a bad thing." So that kind of made me pretty introspective for a few days, if I'm not going to lie.
Well, I mean, maybe if he was surprised, maybe it's the youthful glow, the twinkle in your eyes.
You can't see it.
No way, no way this guy's
the bald head, the gray beard.
So that said, do you feel old?
I do. You know, it's interesting. I don't feel old, but I do feel old. I probably in some ways feel the fittest I've ever been in certain things. But I am starting to notice little things creep up. Like I got a knee thing that's been going on for a few months. I've been working on.
We were talking about that the other day.
Yeah, so that's been a pain in my ass. So I'm trying to manage my training while still trying to rehab that. So I'd say that's probably the most thing that I'm like, these things that I feel like pop up are sticking around a little longer.
Yep.
Yeah.
How about you, Steven?
Do I feel old?
Well, I think just like where does mobility kind of pop up for you, and where do you notice things are changing for you at this stage in life?
I mean, I would say where it probably pops up most is, my sport, ultra running. That's kind of, what I've been focusing on. That, yeah, I mean, that is a sport in general that's pretty hard on the body. It's pretty hard on your joints, and it does require a level of stability and mobility in order to be good at it, really, in order to negotiate or handle different types of terrain and variance in terrain. There needs to be mobility there. So that's kind of where I think about it, that I need to be both strong and flexible in order to weather something that is hard on your body. Like I don't really suggest what I do to most people. Oh, I should do that. I mean, you probably shouldn't,
right?
To be honest with you. So that's where it comes up for me. I know there is a pretty large injury risk with what I'm doing. And thankfully, knock on wood, I'm really injury free. I mean, there are things that sometimes nag that hurt a little bit. Yep. But I'm weathering, races better now than I ever have before. I'm bouncing back from them better than I have ever before. And I think that is, in part due to improvements in my actual running technique, but also, all the things I do outside of actually running.
Yeah. So there you go. In just terms of the balance piece of like, I run, but there's all the things I do so that I can continue to run and not be in pain.
Well, as Steven is a little closer to 40 than I am, I think it's a good example of, like, you can do these things that are extreme endeavors as long, you just got to be more and more dialed in. We've talked about that with our other episode talking about being over 40 is he's getting better, right? He's recovering quicker, even though he's a year older than, or 2 years older than since he, started doing these things longer and longer, and he's recovering better and he's feeling better because he's really on it with his nutrition and all these other side things and his movement and mobility. So,
Cece, you want to weigh in on this?
Just as far as my mobility,
yeah.
I would say, I've definitely noticed in the last 5, 10, 15 years, my mobility has changed and my body definitely feels more stiff or worn, especially in the morning when I wake up and my feet hit the floor and I'm like, oh, my back, my knees, my hips, whatever. It's not, or my shoulders, but it's not like it's painful. It's just stiff. And so it takes me a little bit of time to start moving around. But, I would say I'm probably the worst when it comes to working on my mobility and taking the time to do it. But I will be very conscientious about my warm-ups and making sure I'm going through ranges of motion that I'm going to be working in. And if I feel a little stiff, maybe hang out and work on those joints a little bit more and the muscles surrounding it. But I don't have a specific mobility program or a specific day and time that I designate to it.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump on kind of the back end of that and say my mobility in a lot of ways is disastrous. And in some ways it's very good, depending on the context and application. But I know like my back and hips continually degrade in terms of levels of mobility as I've aged, particularly probably in the last 5 years. And some of that has to do with the types of activities I've done, but more I think it has to do with what I haven't done. I'm way less active than I used to be. I'm still getting my workouts done and whatever, but not like I used to be. Not the same frequency, not the same duration, and not the same intensity. And I find myself making sure that I try to find a lot of balance in all of those things and never overdo anything, because I think it's contributed to kind of where I am. The other thing I'll say about that is, and this will lead us into kind of finding a routine. When I started to really notice it, and I'm going to go back probably about 6 years ago, I was like, God, like my hips and my back, which again are interrelated there. was recognizing, man, I'm getting like, this is starting to become problematic for me. Like I always kind of managed to it. And I definitely had a mobility routine that I would go through, or let's say mobility practice, I think is more what I would say before, during, or before and after workout programs. And some days I would dedicate particularly just to that, like for 20, 30 minutes when like on a rest day, like on an active recovery day, or just if I was short on time, and, you know, I knew I could kind of make up the workout components. Maybe in the next workout, I'm just going to do some mobility work today. But I will tell you this. So what I ended up seeing was the more time I dedicated to it, and this is maybe not what people want to hear, but the less return on investment I actually got. And it started to take time. And because of that, I was like, well, then I need to spend more time there, which then cut into my workout time and the things that I was doing with the basic movements, which is key period, and the basic strength training that I was doing. And I was finding I was avoiding a few things because I thought it might be impacting me in a negative way from a mobility perspective. And I was cutting things out because I was spending more time on the mobility side. And so as a result, I cannot say that my mobility got worse because I was practicing my mobility routine more, or my mobility practice more. But what I can tell you is it did take away from these other things. And what I noticed was my strength and my range of motion began to decrease. So when searching for mobility, it isn't necessarily in something that is specifically put together as a quote unquote mobility exercise or movement on the floor with a piece of equipment or something like that. So gaining mobility and having a routine, if you will, I use air quotes, that's focused to mobility doesn't necessarily mean you have to be doing things that look or feel like, and we're going to mention a few things here, functional range conditioning, LDOA, yoga, you know, PNF type stretching, things of that nature. It doesn't necessarily have to look like this. Sometimes just doing the movements properly in your resistance training program can create and impact that mobility more than anything.
Yeah.
So
with the intention.
with the intention that you're using and being mindful of the loads and the reps sets, like the intensity and the volume and the ranges that you use. So again, I think people are looking for answers in a lot of other things when we just need to look at like, what does your movement in general look like?
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, I want to give people like some things to kind of really think about as a routine, but there's a couple of key markers before you even worry about getting into all these fancy exercises. And this is, you know, I'm an LDOA trainer. I teach a mobility class here. I do a lot of mobility work with clients. But having said that, if you're not sleeping well, if you're not hydrating, right, with hydration, when we need to move, if you can feel someone who's really stiff chronically and fibrotic and their tissue and their fascia is not moving, a lot of that can be dehydration. If you're overly chronically stressed, if you're holding, right, you can see someone who's also tight, they hold stress in their body and they're rigid in their movement. If you're not moving daily, if you're not moving throughout the day, so if you're sitting for a large portion of the day, if all these things aren't in check, and then the last big thing is is exactly what you were just talking about. If you're not applying your mobility to your exercise and to your movement, then you're just spinning your wheels at a certain point. You have to actually put that into application of, you can work on a 90-90 and do all this hip things, but if you don't actually squat, you're going to suck at squatting, right? So I think those bare markers, before you even worry about, are you doing these things? Then how do we get into the weeds of like, what are actual like a mobility drills that I can be doing on a daily basis? A
really good like segue into the next step of this. But, you know, I was kind of like asking Steven, like, where does this show up for you? And he's like, well, it really hasn't yet. I just recognize that it's really important and I don't want it to show up in a negative way. So I try to be very mindful about all the different things that my body needs
proactive,
to do.
preventative, as best as possible.
For sure.
So yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I think about it. I mean, I know you guys, I have my kind of routine that I do that, like, sometimes it's specific, sometimes it's not really specific.
Yeah.
But I guess one thing that I do keep in mind is, even though I am kind of drilling some of the same, like, we can call them like active dynamic stretches, things like that, I am trying to progress them as well. And I do try to encourage that, like in our group training. You know, there are some warm-ups that we do again and again and again and again. You should be considering progressing those as well. Am I more flexible than I was before? Do I have greater range of motion than I did before? Like, there is a point to this. And I do feel, I know sometimes both of you guys have looked at me a little sideways with the shit that I do before my workouts.
It's like, a little woo-woo sometimes.
What is he doing over there? I will say, again,
that's Stephen Bean Steven.
I have been active essentially my entire life, and I have never had a significant injury. Again, knock on wood, I have never had a significant injury once. So something must be working.
Yeah.
So
great point.
I will, again, that's anecdotal, but something must be working.
Yeah. I mean, you're religious about your movement.
consistency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're religious about it. Yeah. 100%.
That's awesome. Just being very, very consistent and checking in with the movement that you're actually doing.
Mhm.
So you were mentioning the progression in your routine. Like, I have a routine, but that routine doesn't mean I do the exact same fucking thing all the time. Maybe it's, and we're not talking about changing up all the movements. We're talking about how we're applying the movement, like pushing that a little deeper, finding that end range that's a little uncomfortable. In that controlled, safer, initial environment, I can do those things and with very little risk of injury, like finding out, like, and testing it, like, is this working? Is what I'm doing actually working? And what does working, quote unquote, working actually mean?
Yeah.
What is my intention? What is my goal with this? Is my goal to increase my range of motion at this particular joint and angle and position or posture that I'm in? And why does that even matter? Like, how does that move to the next thing? And then to your point, Ryan, is like taking it into the quote unquote exercise routine. So now we have all these different routines.
Mhm.
Like, okay, so like what we should be looking at it is more, I think, how Stephen kind of described it, which is, and I think you alluded to this too, Ryan, which is you need to be looking at this holistically. I understand that stability and strength and mobility and endurance and, my reactive, time or my reactive ability or skill, all of that is important.
Yeah.
So when I approach my exercise or quote unquote my mobility, it should be a holistic approach to this. And so that's what I was saying about the like pulling pieces out of my own exercise routine, right? To attack this mobility piece and not really seeing a return on investment. And any return on investment I was seeing, it was very minuscule or minor as compared to what I was losing on the other side, which was a total range of motion, maybe through my whole body. Okay, I picked up a little bit extra range of motion in my ankle there.
Yeah.
What did that give me?
Yes.
Like, what was the benefit of that? So again, kind of coming back to the compass, why am I doing it? Is this for performance? Is this for aesthetics? Or is this for longevity? And can it be all of those things? Can I think about it being that way? Or do I have a very specific goal? Because the quote unquote routine or approach that you take to your mobility at whatever stage in life, particularly at 40, it needs to have purpose behind it, not just to go through the motions.
Well, that should be anything that we're doing.
Agreed, 100%.
Yes, an intentional purpose, yeah.
So, but it's often the thing that is people just going through the motions kind of in the corners, like, this is what I do before. It's kind of a warm-up kind of mobility, and then I get into the meat and potatoes, which is
some half-ass foam rolling routine.
There you have it. So let's talk about some approaches.
Like going through some specific exercise or
whatever we want to call it, go through some mobility or some movement in order to increase mobility.
I mean, I think one of the areas, especially as an Aldoa trainer, that I see some of the most loss of movement is through the spine. You can just picture someone.
That's me.
You can picture someone, I had someone asking me about their I think their mother or their grandmother, and they're like, why as we get older, she's getting more and more hunched and kyphotic and rounded and compressed. And a lot of that, I mean, some of that is gravity's, at the end of the day is going to win the battle, but a lot of that is not moving your spine through ranges of motion. So I do personally think, and there's a lot of up and coming work with Aldoas and things like that. There's a lot of work with a lot of the major sport organizations, a lot of golf, hockey, baseball, basketball that apply these principles where it works on the elongation of the spine, especially at very specific joint structures or joint junctions throughout the body, but a lot rooted in the movement of the spine. And so I think when your spine is moving healthy in a functional way, in a way that you can control and there's proprioception and awareness of these different positions, I think that frees a lot of mobility.
Agreed.
For example, like if you can do all the shoulder mobility drills you want, you can hammer all these chest stretches and do all this stuff. But if your thoracic spine is in too much, you're too kyphotic, you're too rounded there, and you can't get any motion there, a lot of your upper body movements are going to suck. A lot of the end ranges of that mobility comes from your thoracic spine. It doesn't just come from, I just need to yank on my chest all day. So that's a good example of that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And we've talked about this before. can't remember how many episodes back, but we were talking about like, just because you're feeling, I think it was about, somebody asked a question about tight
hamstrings. Yep.
Is what it was. There was another one near there about, I think, tight hip flexors, and, you know, like you're feeling tightness in one spot. And so you go to attack that spot or that area, but that's tertiary.
Yes.
Or secondary or even tertiary to where the issues often lie. And I couldn't agree with you more. And I can tell you that not just that I agreed with, I would have agreed with you 15 years ago, but I definitely agree with you now, because I can tell you, like, I never had issues with hip mobility until I lacked thoracic mobility, right? Which is probably likely less of a consequence of not moving, like intentionally not moving or just not exercising, but more because I lack almost no mobility in my lumbar spine, which is limited anyway to mostly flexion and extension.
Yeah.
But as that stuff has gone up the chain, now all the things outside of that, as you move up into my upper extremity, my lower extremity, have really suffered as a result. And so, you know, again, the paying attention to what's happening at the spine and pelvis as it relates to maintaining, right, your mobility and or gaining some mobility is super important. So it's taking those things through a range of motion. You mentioned Eldoa, which is an application there.
Yes.
So and that might be a little bit more complex for the people that can understand. We should probably do an episode on that sometime. But there's other ways to do that. There's other, like, how to think about this when you walk into your workout.
Yeah. I mean, even just thinking of, you know, people have seen basic exercise like a cat camel, which works more of that flexion extension, doing things in your exercise. We talked about applying this to movement, doing things that are more based on rotation, maybe isolating rotation while the hips are pinned. That works on more thoracic movement, maybe working side bending, working the different positions of your spine, which is something that I actually see a lot more that I feel like is getting popular, which is, I think, is a good thing. Is your spine is meant to move. It's meant to do these things in the right application, in the right capacity, in the right time for you. That's a good thing to say, because I think that's also some nuance there. But you can move your spine in lots of different ways. The biggest thing with mobility is, you know, people have heard this, is that your best move is your next move. Like, you need to keep moving. You need to keep moving your spine. So if you're not moving your spine throughout the day, that's where you get really stiff. That's where you get really rigid. That's where you lose these range of motion. So,
So when we, you know, just kind of thinking about it globally from a larger perspective, think about your spine and your spine moving and all the things that it should be doing. And while you might not have a background in, you know, anatomy, functional anatomy or whatever, it's pretty basic, right? Your lumbar vertebrae, those are the ones at the bottom near your pelvis. They do the flexion extension stuff. That means they move you forward and backwards. It's like the crunching and extension, right?
Exactly.
As you start to move up into the thoracic spine, then you start to pick up additional degrees of rotation as well as flexion extension. So that's where the rotation starts to happen. And then obviously as you get into the cervical spine.
Don't forget about your side bending.
Lateral flexion. Flexion extension, lateral flexion extension, or side bending, if you want, is really the term. And then as you get up into the cervical spine, you get all of that and more. There's the ultimate amount of mobility that you have anywhere in your spine is going to be up there. So with that mobility, you need to have additional stability in order to control it. But the bottom line there is as soon as there's points in there that start to lack this, the other points in that chain are going to be impacted. Now, when you think about how the skeleton is put together, everything's attached to that thing or that stuff. We talk the thing being the spine. If that shit ain't working right, then you can bet that something else down the chain is going not to be working right either. And that just might mean poor performance, but it also could mean, injury, at the end of the day, or debilitation. So anyhow, I love where we could go on and on and on about that. I love where you're going with that. But let's reach out to so if we think about it from a big picture perspective, we're thinking spine and kind of working our way out from there. What are some other components of mobility that sneak up or people could be kind of thinking about going into their quote unquote mobility routine?
I mean, I think a big one for me is rotation at the hips and pelvis, and that control of that, but their ability to internally and externally rotate. So whether that's, a basic drill, we talk about current regression, progression, the basic drill to start working that is a 90-90. If you've seen that 90-90 hip posture of the ability for the hips to be in internal and external rotation and and honestly, sometimes working in antagonists with each other. But then again, applying that to movement where you're challenging into being able to rotate into the pelvis, rotate into a single hip, and work on relative internal rotation or external rotation, things like that. So I think that's something that gets lost, and a lot that's where like these hip replacements, things that come a lot later in life, is because of a lack of internal rotation for a lot of people.
Yeah. So in terms of going back to what I was saying before, and like, dude, I don't understand all those. We'll give you some resources here to maybe go check those out here in a little bit, but I don't understand that. So how can I incorporate that into those types of movements that create the internal external rotation, flexion, extension that we're talking about here? What are some exercises that I'm probably not doing, right, in my routine that would attack those areas and perhaps help me build strength, stability, and mobility all at the same time? And you mentioned the term, which is rotation. Yep. Rotational movements in general, which are usually the most lacking next to the other one that I would say, which would be lateral movement. Yeah. So we're talking about the hips and spine. The basic things to be doing, like think lateral lunging, right? Sidestepping, just moving sideways, right? Lateral lunging is a big one. There's a lot of different things you could add complexity to that lateral lunge with, but just like a lateral movement of some kind will help to start to open up those hips, strengthen those muscles in that range and those ranges in that plane of motion in order to hopefully build some strength, which will then over time, the idea being add to that mobility, your ability to control that joint through a range of motion. Yeah. Not how far it can go passively, but moving. So things like a Cossack squat. Yeah. Right. People have seen that with the kettlebell or even like advanced people, putting a barbell on their back that, they can do it that way. But Cossack squat or just a body way is a great way to do it. Yeah. Sometimes incorporating the top and the bottom. So, other ways to do that would be like lunge with rotation.
Yes. I'd say even a lot of single leg movements involve some degree of rotation in the hips on both sides, but exactly like that, a lunge or any kind of split squat kind of exercise with some intentional rotation. And that can be, it doesn't need to be like that big overemphasized twist, but even just getting the pelvis to rotate into that, which honestly will feel a lot better for a lot of people anyways. But those intentions of adding a little bit of rotation into your single leg or split exercises.
So I'd say that has actually, what you guys are talking about has probably been the most impactful for me in terms of how I'm now bouncing back from these gnarly runs. Yeah. When I first started here at Red Dot, my hips were very weak. Like a lateral lunge was a very challenging movement for me. Running is obviously it's a very sagittal type of movement. So it's forwards, backwards type of movement. And really just working on my adductors, working on my external glutes has made a huge difference for me.
Yeah. You're.
I don't have back pain like I used to have.
Yeah, there you have it.
And he's looking a little slim thick over there too.
The best I can do genetically. We're very
shredded under that.
He is shredded.
We're very flat-assed people.
But no, he has a lower body on him for a distance runner where a lot of people don't.
Especially at his body fat.
They just run it all off. Yeah. But so great point. When you look at sort of upper extremity and what's going on there, we talk about, what happens at the shoulder girdle all the time. And, the movements we see people going through are often very limiting, right? Or what I mean by that is very, like almost too consistent. The pushing, the horizontal pushing, some of the horizontal pulling, and then obviously the vertical pulling. I see less and less vertical or overhead pushing going on, that because for whatever the reasons are. I think a lot of times coaches steer way clear of it because people lack a certain amount of overhead mobility, right? I think that's bad. Yes. I think you still need to have people pushing overhead like this. If they can't do this particular assessment, then they should never load or push overhead, I think is garbage. Yes. So if you're falling into that trap, like I caution you, this will only get worse for you. Yeah. There are ways to modify these types 100%. Of things, as well as kind of get your body prepped, and what we've used the term like either warmed up or primed, however we want to use those terms. In context or application for the person that we're talking to, you need to go overhead. Yeah. And that, again, unless there's something that is completely contraindicated by that, but that's not as common as people think. The assessment doesn't contraindicate, right? It's what you find within the assessment that might, right? A limitation, an injury, something like that, something acute. But the point of that is like, I think people need to go overhead more, and they need to be working through that understanding how to pull and push in that vertical plane. So that's a thing that, when you're looking to increase mobility in your upper body, it doesn't take a lot of weight in order to help to start to increase this range of motion and get your body moving correctly. But then this goes back to, like, if you're lacking upper body mobility, then I would pay attention to how you're actually pushing and pulling and activating those
yeah. So you're mentioning, if they're lacking upper body mobility, but that's really also if they're really lacking upper body thoracic mobility as well.
This goes back to the spine.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what is it? Is it the spine or is it the shoulders?
Yeah.
Or it's a combination thereof.
Both. Is it the chicken or the egg?
Yeah, I mean, some people get a hypermobility in their shoulders because they have such a limited thoracic spine. So then that's other issues. But anyways.
So that's kind of a global or overall view of kind of how we look at mobility. Like, I think going into it, it's not so specific all the time. However, there are things that you can pull out and things that you can do. So real quick, kind of going down a list of how you might approach this. We've talked about priming and warming up. I don't want to revisit that conversation. But when people go into the gym for the day and they're limited on time, and again, speaking to this particular population, I'm lacking a little bit of mobility now. One of the things we didn't mention was your tissue quality now, right, compared to where it was when you were 25 or 35 or whatever, it's probably changed. It's probably different. And so whenever we're applying certain exercises or movements, we need to understand, again, like, how hydrated is it or isn't it, right? Like, where are my limitations from soft tissue or soft tissue approximation? Do I have, a bunch of muscle that I'm trying to get around here? Do I have a bunch of body fat I'm trying to get around here? What are my actual, biomechanics look like in the movement that I'm doing? But that tissue quality is important, and we need to in some cases kind of overcome some things there before you're ever going to gain a ton of mobility. And that comes through consistency and proper application of reps, sets, loads, movements. But when we're going in and we kind of get started, where do you like to start?
I usually, for me, I have a pretty tight thoracic spine. I've done a lot of heavy deadlifting and stuff like that. So I usually like to get some movement in my spine first, whether that's some intentional rotation or intentional flexion extension. There's lots of different drills I have for that. Then from there, I usually move on to my hips, and I find, like, I can generally feel if I'm lacking hip extension, things like that, if I need to give that some attention. But the big things I always hit are something that, like a 90-90, that give me some sort of rotation. And then from there, honestly, if you're really locked on time, I think if you get your spine rotating and moving and your hips rotating and moving, and then you start to test movement from there, applying it to, like, things like hip airplanes or Cossack squats or other things that are more active, then I think you can kind of get a lot of even just out of that initially.
So I have a question then. Would you say then, generally speaking, most people should begin by looking at their thoracic spine versus their lumbar versus their cervical as far as the root? I'm genuinely asking.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is in the spine, there's these kind of alternating patterns of stability with a mobility without a lot of stability and stability without a lot of mobility. So generally the lumbar spine is very mobile. It has a lot of movement. You can kind of see that in a lot of people. So generally they might need to work on the stability of their lumbar spine. That's why we see these, like, core drills all the time, and that's that intentional for that posture. But a lot of the thoracic spine, it's pretty stable, even though a lot of times it gets really rigid and it lacks mobility for a lot of people. So that's where I see a lot more people being rigid in their thoracic spine, and they need to free that, because there's generally more freedom in the lumbar spine already. And where a lot of the issues come from is if there's not movement in the thoracic spine. We've talked about this with Scott. If he can't rotate his thoracic spine, he's trying to yank it from his lumbar spine, and the biomechanics of that isn't set up properly, and that's where people get issues. So yes, I would a lot of times start for people with thoracic spine mobility.
Cool. Good answer. So I think one of the things to think about as you're going in, you kind of mentioned a few different ways that you break it down. For me, when I go in now, there's a few things that I would call, like, routine versus that give me direction on where I should take it next. I don't ever go in with, like, a fixed plan in my head today.
Same.
With regard to the mobility. So, like, I'll do the old school shoulder dislocations. I usually start there because it tells me a lot of things about where I am as compared to the last workout or where I am for the day. Just basic shoulder dislocations with the dowel. So, for people that are, what the hell is that? It's where you're taking that dowel overhead from your hips to your back. You're holding it like in a snatch grip. You're going all the way over, and then you're rotating and you're going around and then, like a helicopter, and you can kind of turn around and go the other way. That'll tell me a lot about how I'm feeling for the day. That's not a mobility exercise for me. That's like that for me. That's a warm up to understand where my warm up and quote unquote priming should go. Yeah, it's like an assessment.
Yeah.
So thinking about those kind of things, what are the things that you could be doing that kind of clue you into where you should be paying attention or focusing, like both in the short and the long term? Because that will also tell me, like, a lot of times it will then take me down the path of getting to the next thing, which is like, wow, like my shoulders feel pretty good today. My chest is really tight. My shoulders feel pretty good. But God, when I'm starting to add that little bit of rotation in there, like my thoracic spine is fucking locked up today. Mm-hmm. So the next movement I move to would be, whatever it is that I choose for spinal or thoracic rotation. There's a lot of things you could do. Get on the floor. I could be supine. I could be prone. I could be doing some work from like a quadruped.
Yeah.
Where you're kind of doing like a thread the needle, reach back up towards the ceiling, which would be like a modified version of the world's greatest.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So the point of this is me walking through the steps of like, what am I going to do, and what are the things that are kind of cluing me into what I need to do? So that's this level of awareness versus like picking. I need to do this, and this will make me more mobile. Right. Yeah. And what I was alluding to there is like further down the line, it's like, well, okay. So my plan in the quote unquote workout portion today was to do these particular things, but I'm noticing right now, like I have kind of a limitation here. So maybe I'm doing more of a single like an isolateral type movement today instead of the bilateral movement that I had planned, whatever that happens to be. I move into something a little bit different where I'm still, impacting the same muscles, but I'm just doing it a different way. So again, thinking about mobility in your routine, you got to think about it from the start, kind of trickling down. Get yourself, figure out some things that you can do that help you understand or have a greater level of awareness going into where you are for the day, not just what you're trying to do over the long term. Some things that you could do in order to, I guess maybe better assist us. Like, Scott, I heard what you said there. And Ryan, I heard what you said there. I have no fucking idea what you guys are talking about. Like this whole 90-90 thing. What is that? This I've never heard of this. I don't even know what this is. I'm Googling it. This is weird French guy. Like there's some stuff. Like, I don't know what this is. It looks funky. Go to the Red Dot Fitness YouTube page or YouTube channel. On that channel, you will find our mobility library.
Yeah.
Within that mobility library, there's all kinds of stuff. All kinds of stuff in there. From a general overall body kind of 20-minute warm-up that you can go through that kind of hits everything, right? To very specific things to hit very specific, joints, but let's just say regions of the body. Yeah. So we've kind of divided it up into hips and low back, up into upper like thoracic area as well as shoulder girdle, and then down into the lower extremity.
Yeah.
So there's a ton of stuff there, and it walks you through, not in a 30-minute format, in a 2 or 3 minute format. I'll kind of walk you through some things and clue you into a few things. That's a great place to go.
Yeah. I was just going to say two things. Well, one, so there's an assessment. We have an assessment playlist on there, and we have a mobility library as well. So there's an assessment library that's more based on assessing yourself and going through that. The other thing I'm going to plug this, if you are looking for more specific mobility work, I do teach a mobility class that I do offer virtually. That's a hybrid class that I offer both in studio.
Yep.
And it's at 6:30 p.m. on Thursdays, PST. So it's something that we get into more of these weeds. We get more into this detail. We work through a lot of these different practices, and that is focused on mobility. So
yeah, it's a super popular class. We've had it here in different formats for a long time. And so, we were able to kind of figure out a way to deliver it virtually. I highly encourage you, if you have questions on that, that's easy. Just go to the website at rdftrainonline.com, and then you can go to the group classes and you'll find it there.
For those who may have experience in mobility or some of these very specific types of movement patterns, we also have a mobility program on our online programs that we have as well. So if you want to put them together into more of a 15, 20 minute designated quote unquote workout or time period, you can also go there.
Right. And that's inclusive with all the other programs that we offer through that program. So our 3 kind of signature programs that exist there: the total body conditioning program, the Fit for Action program, and then the physique program that we have in there, which is our most popular program inside that online membership. So lots of ways to get some mobility stuff. There's never one application. Don't get your head wrapped around, I have to do it this way, or I have to join this one place to do this one thing. A lot of ways to attack this. But one thing is for sure, I made that guarantee at the beginning, If you're not doing it now, you're going to be forced to later. So maybe get comfortable with it now. And again, one way to do that is go to rdftrainonline.com, check out the online memberships page for what Cece just mentioned there, and or go to the group classes page, group training page, and you can see what Ryan's doing.